It began as a gift, a bequeath of Glenbrae Manor to the city of Vancouver, an impressive turn-of-the-century Shaughnessy mansion that would later be transformed into the Canuck Place Children's Hospice.
The origin of VHF is quite interesting. It goes back to 1991, and there's a woman who owned a Glenbrae mansion in Shaughnessy who gave it to the city of Vancouver as a gift for heritage purposes. And I happened to be new on the job as the heritage planner at City Hall in 1990. It was the first file that came on my desk was, I think we need a heritage foundation to set this up. So it finally came about in 1992, and which is why we're celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. It's because of Glenbrae being given to the city.
And 30 years later, Vancouver Heritage Foundation has left a lasting legacy through its many educational programs, special projects, and grant programs that advance appreciation of heritage places and their stories and provide practical support for heritage conservation. Over the 30-year history, the commitment and passion of so many people, from the staff to the board members to donors and hundreds of volunteers, that's really what's made Vancouver Heritage Foundation so special.
The vision for Vancouver Heritage Foundation is to really foster within our community an appreciation of those stories that make up our city, make up our culture, make us who we are. We want everybody to understand how we got to where we are, learn from the past, celebrate the past, and use that as a foundation to move forward.
Vancouver is a dynamic modern city, but has so much history and fascinating heritage places, and VHF has really worked hard to keep that part of the city's story.
The initial vision was very simple. It was basically the conservation and care of heritage buildings in the city, which is good in that it's kind of all-encompassing, but it's kind of vague. So it seemed that the most effective thing that the Vancouver Heritage Foundation could do was to promote education and promote heritage conservation through public awareness.
What was exciting actually about those early days is trying to invent ourselves. How were we doing it? How are we going to fund it? What are the best things and strategies to do? So it was also a really exciting creative moment in time to think about how can we give a stronger presence to the importance of heritage in the city.
One of the first events that I remember it did was it auctioned off the terracotta from the medical dental building, the Georgia Medical Dental Building. And so you would see these pieces of Art Deco terracotta popping up in gardens all over the city at that time. But there was no Board of Governors, there was no real mechanism for policies. And so the foundation languished through a period in the 1990s. And then around 1997, 1998, a woman by the name of Lauren Prentice, who's now Lauren Wolfe, was hired to be the ED and to put a board together.
That first board was really an interesting one. It brought a lot of threads of knowledge to it. I mentioned earlier what I found exciting was it was a moment in time of enormous creativity. I can't tell you how fortunate we're to land on Diane. The initiative, her connections into the community, her ability to engage with all sorts of different voices, and yet and an incredible creativity.
I was involved for close to 14 years as the executive director of the Vancouver Heritage Foundation. It was the best job I ever had. Seeing this organization grow from a little organization with one file box of paper, one bank account with $43,000 in it, and grow into the public programming organization that it is today. And it was just an amazing privilege to be part of that journey.
VHF has always been an organization that can do a lot with a little. And this has always been demonstrated in its wide variety of engaging programming and its dissemination of practical support through its many grant programs.
One of the early successes of the Heritage Foundation, I think, was the True Colors program, which is, still runs today.
When we started the True Colors program, we just didn't have the information on what colors were historically used in Vancouver. We really saw the research as being critical and to driving the program to be authentic, not to make it up. And so from day one, we based it on the research that we were going to do by sampling colors. You can't look at a black and white photo and find the color of a building. You can see kind of what's dark and what's light, but that's about it. So we had to actually go to the buildings and ask the buildings what they were to begin with and really sample the paint. So that was where we began to delve into what I call the art and the science of historic color. The science of actually sampling the paint, matching the color, finding the right sample. And then we started to build up a palette of these colors.
VHF started giving grants in 1999 and has really made a little go a long way since then, really providing fabulous encouragement to owners and site stewards, as well as the financial assistance, which of course helps get the project done. In recent years, the City of Vancouver has provided funding that's really enabled VHF to provide so much more support to heritage projects. First with the Heritage Energy Retrofit Grant that launched in 2015 that really recognises the benefits of retaining older buildings and homes and reducing their carbon emissions. And then more recently in 2019 with the launch of the Heritage Conservation Grants Programme that built on really 20 years of VHF grants to be able to support so many more projects across the city.
The house tour was the first broad-based program we did that involved hundreds of volunteers and thousands of people on one day creating a real energy around heritage buildings. And I think from that we got energy as an organization saying, wow, we can do this. We can engage the public, get them excited about older buildings in the city. And it really, I think, was the one that launched everything else. Everything grew out of the Heritage House Tour, the lectures, the other grant programs. The house tour gave us a base to grow from.
I first got involved with VHF because my house was on a house tour. It's built in 1907, just off Commercial Drive. And I was very impressed with the program, but also what I learned about my own house and the community. As an architect, I hope that the buildings I'm designing today will be around in 100 years. And to me, it was just a really valuable and important organization to participate in and support in whatever way I can. So it's been 10 years and I've enjoyed every minute of it.
Making heritage places and their stories accessible to as many people as possible has really been something that VHF has worked hard on over the years. Certain programs certainly have really helped VHF to do that. And the Places That Matter initiative was really key in that.
But the Places That Matter program knitted people's stories with particular places in the city and put up plaques and engaged a very, very wide cross-section of the city in doing this. Possibly a wider cross-section that hadn't been engaged in, for example, the Heritage Homes Tour or some of the other things that were more focused on architecture. And in doing so, I think responded very, very well to the inclusive nature of the city that we are trying to create as we go forward into the 21st century.
I've been involved with the Vancouver Heritage Foundation mainly through Jessica Kwan in 2012 when the Places of Matter plaque was installed on the livestock building at Hastings Park. I was part of the committee that helped promote the livestock building as well as other buildings there to commemorate the 1942 forced clearance of the Japanese Canadian community.
I think that's kind of what PTM is. It's another way for the community to come together and say, hey, this is something that's important to us, and this is why it's important to us. And it gives a little bit of background to future generations to realize, like, this is something that was important not only to the community, but to our culture and to our ancestors.
I've actually been involved over the years with the Places That Matter program. One of the specific projects that we were really proud at UBC to have taken part in and helped is the Nellie Kwang Yip house, to kind of tell a story across generations about who owned this house, what kinds of things went there. She was, a crucial figure in our collective history, and especially the history of Chinatown as basically the midwife to so many children who were born in that area, who otherwise, weren't welcome at, hospitals, who, weren't going to treat them with dignity and respect.
When we found out that it was going to be one of the Places That Matter, it was such an honor to become one of the places that people had voted and found it was significant. I was in disbelief. It was actually came at a time where Larry and I were trying to decide what we should do with the house. And I was afraid that the stories were being forgotten. So it went through many incarnations to the design that we ended up with.
So ultimately what we did was my two daughters, Alexandra and Lauren, sponsored the plaques for that to go in front. So one in Chinese, one in English. They really described the story about of how my parents, Walter and Mary Chan, were part of, led the community in terms of saving the community. And that was the idea. And that was a story that's on Places That Matter and gave them a long-lasting heritage with that aspect. So a legacy that carries on.
We started the Heritage Site Finder because it became very evident to us that if you wanted to find a heritage site in the city, you had to, for many years, we had to get the piece of paper, 8.5 by 11, stapled in the top corner, and you had to flip the pages looking for, is it on the Heritage Register or not? In 2010, there has to be a better way to find a heritage site in the city. And so we started playing with the idea of the Site Finder. And I just barely got it started when the next executive director, Judith, came after me and just took it and ran with it.
I joined Vancouver Heritage Foundation as the executive director when Diane retired in 2013. And I really stepped into a full program of activities with lots of things already underway. I really inherited so many great ideas, lots of good efforts that were already happening, and so much strong support that it was really a wonderful place to be starting from.
One of the core tenets of the Vancouver Heritage Foundation is its commitment to education in the broadest sense of the word. The Vancouver Heritage Foundation has a flagship education program called Old School, and within that is a certificate in building conservation. I would say that one of the highlights of the program has been the dual audience. Mid-career professionals taking programs for continuing education credits, whether they're architects, planners, engineers, landscape architects, building officials, as well as homeowners, members of the interested public, civic advocates. It really is a coming together of people who care passionately about heritage resources, whether it's buildings, sites, landscapes, engineering, structures.
In the heritage world, There's never really been formal educational programs much available. There's never really been general interest programs. So we're really deficient in that regard. And so the need was clearly there. And it was part of the understanding in setting up the mandate of the Heritage Foundation that there had to be a commitment to education to support the entire heritage conservation mandate. And education meant technical assistance, technical information, help with the nuts and bolts of conservation. We also wanted to make heritage fun. We wanted to make this not onerous. You don't have to study 40 years to learn heritage. You can do it in small modules and small bites and not have to give up your day job to do it. And it can be fun and engaging and interesting. And so from that point of view, Old School has been extremely successful in building over time a heritage culture of people who have gone through, have this basic knowledge, and really understand the basic principles.
One of the great pleasures of working with the VHF is the walking tours that I get to do, but also, again, off the beaten track. Let's not go down and do a typical Chinatown tour. If we're going to do Chinatown, we're going to get into the weeds about other aspects of the neighborhood that haven't been discussed. But then it's also getting away from what we would think of as traditional heritage. And I think that's what I've been very lucky to achieve, if I can be so bold, is to show folks areas of the city they wouldn't think about walking in themselves, and opening, I hope, eyes to not dismissing places because it's not recognized as anything.
The Heritage Foundation reached out to us in 2018, and I reached out to them knowing that they're around, and then also, kind of a bit hesitant because of my image I had of, the heritage world being very about colonial privilege. And me coming from a very racialized community with lost heritage, dispossessed heritage, and a very dark heritage. It's a dark story. And, it meant a lot to our organization to have that kind of acknowledgement. So we worked together on the map guide in partnership with the Nikkei National Museum to develop a walking tour of historic Kyle Street.
One of the other programs I think that's also has some great value and is set sort of slightly differently than other presentations from other local groups are really the Highcroft series of talks. It's that carefully curated and diverse set of talks that adds to all the other carefully curated research and information that the foundation is responsible for. So it really just has raised the bar, I think, in so many different ways of how we present information and the type of heritage and history that we're presenting.
I think the program's been running some 10 to 12 years. So I think that it has brought both attention to heritage, but also to art in general and public art. And I think that's an enormous contribution that the foundation has also made to this city and to this community, of being simultaneously able to make people aware both of heritage and art. To me, it's a really exciting, interesting, unique story. I still remember, and I'd been off the board, I ran across Diane somewhere, and she was mentioning that they would love to find a donor wall somewhere in the city. Well, it just happened. I was the architect for the redevelopment in addition to the CBC. We had gotten to a moment in the project, part of the site had been sold off to Concord Pacific, part was being redeveloped. There was an obligation to put in a certain type of building and amenity in the space where the wall now sits. Well, it didn't happen. So what I was able to do was actually build a series of connections between Diane and the foundation. And I think what it's done as well is really animate the public space around the CBC as well. And I don't know if people remember from way back when, before 2010, it was a big concrete box down on Hamilton Street. So I think the wall has in fact contributed enormously just to the regeneration along Hamilton Street as well.
Getting young people engaged with local history, with heritage places, and even with heritage conservation is really key to ensuring that heritage places have a future in our city. So in 2019, VHF launched a heritage study guide for educators and their students to really learn about local history and heritage places that they could access in their neighborhoods around them. And with that as well, VHF launched some grant programs to provide free books to those classrooms and also field trip support as well. And that's been a really key program for VHF to engage with young people and really get them a little bit more interested in the history of their city and in heritage places and the stories that they can tell.
The Heritage in Schools program is important because it gives teachers a starting point and some excellent examples and resources to help them as they guide their students into a greater understanding, appreciation, and love of heritage and history in the city. I think the key to success has really been bringing in a diversity of voices. Teachers are really aware of meeting the students where they're at and ensuring that they're addressing all of the different cultures that are represented in their classrooms. And so a big part of what the School Heritage Program has done is to ensure that those different voices are represented and there's a diversity of representation. And so looking at the guide, you can really see a range of different organizations and that reciprocity. So working with Musqueam, working with the Punjab Market, working with a variety of voices all across the city makes a big difference for teachers, because I think that can sometimes be a challenge too, to know where to start to tell the stories of your students and to make them aware of their own history in this particular place.
One of my hopes for the future of VHF is that every child educated in our city will at some point encounter somebody from the Vancouver Heritage Foundation. And through that encounter, will learn more about their own community and how that community is unique and distinct within the context of Vancouver proper, and feel a little more attached to that past and to that story of community.
Through the years, VHF has grown and evolved and found new ways of connecting with the wider Vancouver community to highlight the diverse array of stories and histories that make Vancouver such a vibrant city.
It's been an amazing experience working with the foundation and its mandate for, 30 years. It's been a continuous part of my life and my career, because for me, both as a consultant and someone who passionately cares about heritage, it's a way to give back. It's a way to support the heritage community, and it's a way to bring that understanding of the value of heritage out to a larger public.
I've been attending VHF programming for years now. I love the events, the diversity of the programming, from sustainability, the histories of underrepresented communities, to the history of Stanley Park and the Indigenous communities that have been here from time immemorial. It's always helped me understand the multitude of histories that inform the great place we live.
I think the success of the Heritage Foundation is really attributed to two things. One is really the passion of its members and staff about the heritage and history of the city. And the other, which, is very dear to me, is really the willingness to be open and the willingness to accept the expanding definition of heritage. And I think that is, so willingness to change. And, heritage is not about being stuck in the past. It is about integrating the past for the future. And I think that willingness makes it a leader for the future. So that's really, to me, the keys to success.
The role of our sponsors and our funders is really absolutely critical. VHF relies on partners to provide the services, the education, the programs that we do to a very broad community. And really without them, we would not be able to perform the work that we do today.
Volunteers have made so many events possible. The large scale of something like the Heritage House Tour just wouldn't be possible for VHF to present without the volunteers that have staffed that event. And the same goes for so many of the other events that VHF has been able to present. Volunteer support has really enriched and augmented what VHF has been able to achieve over the years.
I think one of the Vancouver Heritage Foundation's strength is that it has continued to evolve and has become a big tent under which many, many different individuals and organizations have sought to become involved over the years. And that's really been a privilege to volunteer, to meet people, to hear about different issues, and really to think about what does it really mean to be engaged in heritage conservation in the 21st century. The field has evolved, the foundation has evolved, the audiences have evolved. We now need to engage the next generation so that people who care about the places that matter to them have a place to come, have conversations, to learn, to express their ideas, to explore new topics, and hopefully take away things to their own communities and their own constituencies.
The VHF is important to anyone who values heritage, both in terms of our intangible heritage and the built environment. It's a complex topic, one that intersects with multiple interesting and dynamic histories in this city. And I think the VHF does a wonderful job of really recognizing everyone's history here and the way it's shown up in our city in different neighborhoods and different experiences across, time and space. And you need an organization that recognizes that the value of that work and the value of people's stories.
Happy to have been involved with the VHF for so many years, and I'm thrilled to see that it's lasted for 30 years, and hope the new home at Heritage Hall is terrific.
Here on our anniversary, as we look forward into both expanding and strengthening our programming on the sustainability, programming that centers diversity, equity, and inclusion, programming that celebrates, as we always have done, our beautiful built heritage here in Vancouver. I hope people can find the time and continue to support us as we move forward in our work.
I believe Vancouver Heritage Foundation has a very long and bright future. And I say that because I sincerely believe Vancouverites are curious about our history. We're a very young city, but there is a history, there is a story to be told. And I see a curiosity from people in wanting to understand what led to us becoming the city we are, how we got here, and to celebrate that. And so I'm very excited about the next decade and next 30 years for VHF.
I'd like to thank the hundreds of people who have given their time, their energy, their financial support to make Vancouver Heritage Foundation what it is today. As we look to the next 30 years, we'll continue to advance the appreciation and the conservation of our city's heritage. And I really think that together we can continue to make a future for heritage in Vancouver.